"Can you be my mom?" Little girl says. Waitress accepts jokingly, unaware her dad is a millionaire. The diner was almost empty that Tuesday afternoon. Just the hum of the old air conditioner and the smell of coffee that had been sitting too long. Letitia Jones was wiping down the counter when she heard the little girl's voice, clear and serious, cutting through the quiet like a bell. "Can you be my mom?" Leticia froze. The cloth in her hand dripped water onto the laminate. She turned slowly to face the booth by the window, where a little girl with dark curls and enormous eyes stared up at her with an expression so hopeful it physically hurt to look at. The man sitting across from the child, clearly her father, had gone completely pale. His coffee cup was halfway to his lips, suspended in shock. "Sophie, sweetheart," he started, his voice strained. But the little girl wasn't looking at him. She was looking at Letitia with the kind of desperate earnestness that only children possess. The kind that doesn't know how to lie or pretend or protect itself. "I know you're working," the girl continued, her small hands gripping a stuffed elephant that had seen better days. "But you make good chocolate milk and you know about vanilla secrets, and you smiled at me like you meant it. So, can you be my mom? Just for a little while? Just while we eat pancakes?" The question hung in the air between them. Letitia's throat had closed. Every instinct screamed at her to deflect, to make a joke, to gently explain why that wasn't how the world worked, and retreat to the safety behind the counter where customers stayed customers and nobody asked her for anything she couldn't give. But those eyes, those too old, too careful eyes that had seen loss and were still brave enough to ask for love anyway. "Sure, sweetheart," Letitia heard herself say, her voice rough with emotion she didn't want to feel. "I can be your pancake mom." The smile that lit up the little girl's face was incandescent, like someone had turned on the sun inside her. She scooted over in the booth, patting the vinyl seat beside her. "Will you sit with us? Moms sit with their families at meals. That's what my old mom used to do." My old mom. Two words that explained everything and broke Leticia's heart in the same breath. Have you ever had a stranger ask you for something so impossible you couldn't say no? Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and seen your own pain reflected back at you? Have you ever said yes to something that terrified you because saying no would have broken you both? This waitress had no idea that saying yes as a joke would change 3 lives forever. She didn't know that the man sitting in that booth was a millionaire. She didn't know his daughter had been searching for someone to fill a void that money couldn't touch. She didn't know that her own carefully constructed walls were about to crumble. And she definitely didn't know that choosing to sit down in that booth would lead to the most beautiful and terrifying journey of her life. What happened next challenged everything Leticia believed about love, loss, and second chances. It forced her to confront the grief she'd been running from for 3 years. It asked her to be brave enough to let people in when she'd sworn she never would again. If you've ever been afraid to open your heart after it's been shattered, if you've ever wondered whether broken things can be rebuilt into something even stronger, if you've ever had to choose between safety and love, this story will hit different. Hit that like button right now because we're about to dive into a journey that proves vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing we can do. And make sure you subscribe to Mr. Dawson Long Stories because we tell the truth about what it means to be human, messy and real, and absolutely worth it. Now let me take you back to where this really started. 3 hours before that question. Before Letitia Jones became a pancake mom. Before everything changed. The coffee had gone cold in Leticia's hand. Again, she stared at the ceramic mug, watching the surface shimmer with the vibration of the ancient air conditioning unit that rattled through Riverside Diner like it was trying to shake itself apart. 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday meant the lunch rush had dissolved into that strange quiet time when the fluorescent lights seemed too bright and every sound echoed against the cracked vinyl booths. She should have been wiping down tables. Should have been refilling salt shakers or rolling silverware into paper napkins or any of the dozen tasks that filled the spaces between customers. Instead, she stood behind the counter, holding cold coffee, staring at nothing and everything simultaneously. "You planning to drink that or just commune with it spiritually?" Letitia blinked, pulled back to the present by Mariana's voice. Her co-worker, friend really though Letitia had learned to be careful with that word, was watching her with the kind of expression that meant she'd been talking for a while before Letitia had noticed. "Sorry," Letitia said, setting down the mug. "Long night. You've had a lot of long nights lately." Mariana's tone was gentle, not accusatory, but Leticia felt the observation settle into her chest anyway. "When's the last time you actually slept more than 4 hours? Sleep is overrated. So is pretending you're fine when you're clearly not. Before Leticia could formulate a response that would deflect without being dishonest, the bell above the diner door chimed. Both women looked up automatically, their server instincts kicking in before conscious thought. The man who entered was unexpected, not because he was particularly unusual looking, but because he was so profoundly out of place. His suit probably cost more than Leticia made in 3 months. His watch caught the afternoon light and threw it back in precise, expensive angles. His shoes had never seen scuff marks, let alone the kind of wear that came from real life. But it was the little girl clutching his hand who made Leticia's breath catch. She couldn't have been more than 5 or 6, all dark curls and enormous eyes that seemed to take up half her face. She wore a purple dress with white tights and shoes that had clearly been selected by someone who understood children should be comfortable, not fashionable. Her free hand clutched a stuffed elephant that had seen better days, loved into a state of permanent dishevelment. "Daddy," the girl whispered, loud enough to carry across the empty diner. "Are you sure this is okay? It doesn't look like our usual places. I promised you real food, didn't I?" The man's voice was warm, patient in a way that suggested genuine affection rather than performed parenting. Not everything good comes from restaurants with reservations and dress codes. They slid into a booth by the window. The afternoon sun cut across the table at an angle that made the little girl's curls glow copper. Leticia found herself smoothing down her apron before she'd consciously decided to approach them. Mariana shot her a look that said, "I'll take this one if you're not up for it." But Leticia shook her head. Something about the little girl's grip on that elephant, about the careful way the man was helping her into the booth, made Leticia want to be the one to serve them. Professional distance, she reminded herself. Take their order, bring their food, collect payment, move on. That was the job. That was all it needed to be. "Welcome to Riverside," Leticia said, pulling out her order pad with practiced ease. "Can I start you folks off with something to drink?" The little girl looked up at her. Leticia felt something shift in her chest. Those eyes were too old, too careful, like someone who'd learned young that the world required vigilance. "Do you have chocolate milk?" the girl asked quietly. "We do. Best chocolate milk in the city, according to my professional opinion." "What makes it the best?" The question was serious, requiring a real answer. "Well," Leticia said, crouching down so she was at eye level with the booth, "we use real cocoa powder, not syrup. And we add just a tiny bit of vanilla extract. Most people don't notice it consciously, but it makes all the difference." The girl considered this gravely. "I'd like to try it, please." "Excellent choice. And for you, sir?" The man, she still didn't have a name and he hadn't offered one, smiled slightly. "Coffee, black, and whatever she wants to eat." "Can I have pancakes?" the girl asked, looking to her father for permission. "With strawberries?" "Pancakes at 3 in the afternoon?" He raised an eyebrow, but his tone was indulgent. "What would your nutritionist say? That food is food regardless of what time you eat it, and breakfast foods have the same nutritional value at dinner as they do at morning?" The girl recited this like she'd heard it before, multiple times. "Can't argue with that logic. Pancakes it is." Leticia wrote down the order, fighting a smile. "Strawberries and whipped cream?" "Yes, please." The girl paused. "What's your name?" "Leticia." "What's yours?" "I'm Sophie. This is my dad." She gestured to the man, who extended his hand with a kind of formal courtesy that seemed anachronistic in a diner with cracked vinyl booths. "Walter Scott." His handshake was firm, but brief, professional. Leticia matched it, years of waitressing having taught her to read people through the quality of their grip. Walter Scott said, "I respect you as a person, not just a service provider," which was more than she could say for half the customers who came through the door. "I'll get that started for you," Leticia said, standing. "Chocolate milk and pancakes, coffee black." She retreated to the counter, putting in the order while trying to ignore Mariana's knowing look. "Don't," Leticia said preemptively. "Don't what?" "Whatever you're thinking. Don't. I'm just noticing that's the first time I've seen you actually smile in about 2 weeks." "I smile. You perform the facial movements associated with smiling. That's different than actually smiling." Mariana poured the coffee, dark and steaming. That little girl got a real smile. Even the fancy dad got a real smile. They seem nice. Nice. Is that what we're calling it? Leticia chose not to respond. Instead, she focused on preparing Sophie's chocolate milk, with the kind of attention usually reserved for much more complicated tasks. Real cocoa powder, measured precisely. A drop of vanilla extract, Invisible, but essential. Whole milk, because children needed the fat for their developing brains. A fact Leticia knew from the year she'd spent working at a pediatric hospital cafeteria, back when she'd still believed in planning for the future. When she brought the drinks to the table, Sophie was showing Walter something on a tablet. Her small fingers swiped through images while she narrated with intense focus. And this one has flying buttresses, which means the walls can have bigger windows because the weight is distributed differently. See? I see, Walter said, genuine interest in his voice. The Gothic architecture we talked about last week. Exactly. And look at this one. Leticia set down the drinks quietly, not wanting to interrupt. But Sophie noticed immediately, her eyes lighting up when she saw the chocolate milk. Thank you, she said with careful politeness, then took a sip. Her expression transformed into pure delight. Daddy, taste this. She was right about the vanilla. Walter obediently took the tiny sip Sophie offered, nodding with exaggerated seriousness. You're absolutely correct. That's superior chocolate milk. My compliments to the chef. I'm the chef today, Leticia admitted. Well, the chocolate milk chef. The actual chef is making your pancakes. Are you the one who knows about the vanilla secret? Sophie asked. I am. How did you learn it? The question was innocent, but it landed somewhere tender. Leticia hesitated, old pain flickering through her before she could suppress it. Someone taught me, she said finally. A long time ago. Someone who believed that even simple things should be done right. Sophie nodded like this made perfect sense. My mom used to say that. Before she trailed off. Walter's hand found hers across the table, gentle but grounding. The gesture told Leticia everything she needed to know. Widower. Recent enough that the little girl still couldn't say the words. Old enough that they were trying to build a life around the absence. Your pancakes will be up in about 5 minutes, Leticia said softly, giving them space to recover. Let me know if you need anything else. She retreated again, busying herself with tasks that didn't need doing. Mariana watched her with that knowing expression that Leticia had learned meant a lecture was coming. That little girl, Mariana started. I know. Do you? She lost her mother. Recently. He's trying to help her through it. Leticia wiped down the already clean counter with more force than necessary. It's sad. That's all. That's all. What else would it be? Mariana was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. You're allowed to connect with people, you know. Even after everything. Especially after everything. I connect with people all day. That's literally my job. That's not what I mean, and you know it. The pancakes came up before Leticia had to respond. She arranged them carefully on the plate. 3 perfect circles, golden brown, with fresh strawberries arranged in a pattern that seemed appropriate for a little girl who noticed architectural details. Whipped cream on the side because some children preferred to add it themselves, controlling their own experience. When she brought the plate to the table, Sophie gasped. They're beautiful, she breathed, like Leticia had presented her with fine art instead of diner pancakes. Enjoy, Leticia said, but as she turned to leave, Sophie's small voice stopped her. Leticia? Yes? The little girl looked up at her with those 2 old eyes. Leticia knew before she spoke that whatever came next would be important. Can you be my mom? The diner seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere the air conditioning unit rattled. A car drove past on the street outside. The coffee maker hissed and gurgled. But in the bubble of their booth, everything had gone still. Walter's face had drained of color. Sophie, sweetheart, I know you're working, Sophie continued, earnest and utterly serious. But you make good chocolate milk and you know about vanilla secrets, and you smiled at me like you meant it. So can you be my mom? Just for a little while? Just while we eat pancakes? Leticia's throat had closed. Every instinct screamed at her to deflect, to make a joke, to gently explain why that wasn't how the world worked and retreat to the safety of professional distance. Instead, she heard herself say, Sure, sweetheart. I can be your pancake mom. Sophie's smile was incandescent. Okay. Will you sit with us? Moms sit with their families at meals. That's what my old mom used to do. Sophie, Walter said gently. Leticia is working. She has other customers. He glanced around the empty diner. His argument deflated mid-sentence. Just for a few minutes, Leticia found herself saying, While you eat your pancakes, then I have to get back to work. She slid into the booth next to Sophie. The little girl immediately scooted closer, her small, warm body pressing against Leticia's side like it belonged there. The trust was absolute, devastating, completely unearned. "You can have a bite," Sophie offered, pushing the plate toward her. "Moms share food." "That's very generous, but these are yours. My old mom always said that sharing makes food taste better." The phrase "my old mom" was going to haunt Leticia for days. She could already tell. "Then I would be honored to share," Leticia said, accepting the fork Sophie handed her and taking the smallest possible bite of pancake. Perfect." Sophie beamed and turned to Walter. "See, Daddy? She likes them." Walter was watching this interaction with an expression Leticia couldn't quite read. Something between gratitude and grief and wonder. "Thank you," he mouthed silently to Leticia over Sophie's head. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They sat there for 10 minutes. Sophie narrated her way through the pancakes, telling Leticia about her school and her friends and the elaborate fantasy world she'd constructed, involving dragons and castles that definitely had flying buttresses. Walter contributed occasionally, but mostly he watched his daughter come alive in a way that suggested this level of animation was rare and precious. Finally, Sophie scraped up the last bite of whipped cream and declared herself finished. "That was the best pancake experience of my life," she announced. "Thank you for being my pancake mom." "You're very welcome," Leticia said. "It was an honor." "Can we come back?" Sophie asked, looking between Leticia and Walter. "Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow might be too soon," Walter said carefully. "But we can definitely come back sometime soon. Promise?" "Promise." Leticia extracted herself from the booth, already feeling the absence of Sophie's warm presence against her side. She cleared the plate, brought the check, processed Walter's credit card. She tried not to notice the black card that suggested wealth beyond anything in her comprehension. When they stood to leave, Sophie wrapped her arms around Leticia's waist in an unexpected hug. "Thank you for being nice to me," she whispered. "A lot of people are nice to my daddy because he has money, but you were nice to me just because." Before Leticia could respond, Sophie had pulled back and taken Walter's hand. They were walking toward the door. Walter paused at the threshold, looking back. "We really will come back," he said. "If that's all right with you." "It's a free country," Leticia replied, aiming for casual and landing somewhere near overwhelmed. Diners open 6 days a week. After they left, Leticia stood at the window. She watched them climb into a sleek black car that probably cost more than she'd earn in 5 years. Sophie waved through the window. Leticia waved back before she could stop herself. "Well," Mariana said from behind her, "that was interesting." "It was nothing. That little girl asked you to be her mother. You said yes, and you sat with them for 10 minutes during your shift. That's not nothing. She's a lonely kid who lost her mom. I made her feel better for 15 minutes. That's just basic human decency. And him? What about him? Don't pretend you didn't notice he couldn't take his eyes off you the entire time you were sitting with his daughter." Leticia turned away from the window. "I'm not interested in getting involved with a customer, especially not one who's clearly dealing with grief and raising a daughter alone." "Why especially not?" "Because I've done grief, Mariana. I've done loss. I know what it looks like, and I know it makes people reach for anything that feels like comfort. He's not interested in me. He's interested in someone who made his daughter smile. That's not the same thing. And if you're wrong, I'm not." But even as she said it, Leticia felt the weight of Sophie's hug, the trust in those two old eyes, the way Walter had looked at her like she'd performed a miracle instead of just sitting in a booth for 10 minutes. "They won't come back," she told herself. "Rich people don't return to diners in this neighborhood. They made a wrong turn, or they were slumming, or who knows what. Tomorrow they'll go back to their real life, and this will just be a weird story they tell at dinner parties. The little girl who asked the waitress to be her mother. How amusing. How quaint." Leticia pushed the thought away and returned to her work. Tables to wipe, salt shakers to fill, coffee to brew, the reliable rhythm of tasks that didn't require emotional investment. Her shift ended at 9. She walked the 6 blocks to her apartment through streets that smelled like summer rain and exhaust fumes. She passed buildings that had been slated for renovation for years, but never quite made it to the top of the city's priority list. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor of a walk-up that the landlord optimistically called vintage, and everyone else called one bad winter away from condemnation. Inside it was clean but sparse. Leticia had never seen the point in accumulating things. Things required attachment, and attachment led to loss, and loss was something she'd had enough of to last several lifetimes. She showered. ate leftover takeout straight from the container, tried to sleep. Instead, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the afternoon. Can you be my mom? The question had been so simple, so earnest, so completely impossible to fulfill. And yet she'd said yes, not because she thought it meant anything, not because she had any illusions about seeing Sophie or Walter again, but because in that moment, with a lonely little girl looking up at her with desperate hope, Leticia hadn't been able to say anything else. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, she finally drifted off. She dreamed of chocolate milk and vanilla secrets and small hands that trusted absolutely. They came back on Thursday. Leticia was refilling the coffee station when the bell chimed. She looked up to find Sophie barreling through the door with the kind of focused determination usually reserved for people twice her age. "Leticia," Sophie called out, waving enthusiastically. "We came back. Daddy promised, and he keeps his promises." Walter followed at a more sedate pace, looking apologetic. "I hope this is all right. She's been talking about the pancakes and you for 2 days straight." "It's fine," Leticia said. She was surprised to find she meant it. "Same table? If it's available." It was a Thursday afternoon. Of course it was available. The whole diner was available. They settled into the same booth. This time Leticia didn't need to ask what they wanted. Chocolate milk for Sophie, coffee black for Walter. Based on the way Sophie was looking at the menu, probably pancakes again. "Can I try something different?" Sophie asked. "Or should I have the pancakes because they're perfect and changing perfect is risky?" "That's a very philosophical question," Leticia said seriously. "What's your risk tolerance today?" Sophie considered this. "Medium. I want to be adventurous but not too adventurous. How about a grilled cheese sandwich with tomato soup? It's adventurous because it's different, but not too adventurous because it's still comfort food." "That sounds perfect." "Yes, please." When Leticia brought their order, Sophie gestured for her to sit down. "Are you my pancake mom again today?" she asked hopefully. "Sophie," Walter said gently, "we talked about this. Leticia has work to do. She was very kind to sit with you last time, but we can't expect." "It's a slow day," Leticia interrupted, surprising herself. "I can sit for a few minutes." She slid into the booth. Sophie immediately pressed against her side, just like before. Like it was already a tradition, a pattern, something they'd done 1,000 times instead of once. "Tell me about your week," Leticia said. "What did you do?" Sophie launched into an elaborate description of her school science project, something involving volcanoes and baking soda. Then her friend Madison's birthday party. There had been a magician who wasn't very good. Then the new book her dad had read to her about a girl who built a castle out of found objects. Walter contributed occasional details, but mostly he watched his daughter talk to Leticia with rapt attention, like she was describing the mysteries of the universe instead of elementary school social dynamics. "What about you?" Sophie asked eventually. "What did you do this week?" It was such a normal question, the kind people asked each other constantly. But Leticia found herself genuinely considering it, instead of offering the automatic deflection. "I worked," she said. "I read a book. I went to the farmer's market on Sunday and bought tomatoes that were so ripe they practically fell apart when I cut them." "What book?" Sophie asked. "A mystery novel about a detective who solves crimes using architectural knowledge." Sophie's eyes lit up. "That sounds amazing. Can I borrow it when you're done?" "It might be a bit old for you," Leticia said gently, "but I'll look for some mysteries that are age-appropriate. I used to love them when I was your age." "Really? What was your favorite?" And just like that, they were off again, talking about books and stories and why mysteries were satisfying, because they made sense in the end, because chaos became order, because problems could be solved. 20 minutes passed before Leticia realized she'd been sitting there, talking, connecting, letting this little girl into her carefully guarded space. When she stood to return to work, Sophie hugged her again. "Thank you for being my lunchtime mom," she whispered. "It makes me less lonely." The words hit Leticia square in the chest. She hugged back, careful and brief, then retreated to the safety of the counter before she could do something foolish like cry. Walter paid the check and left a tip that was exactly 20%. Not insulting, not excessive, just precisely correct. As they left, he paused. "She's not usually this open with strangers. You should know that. Whatever you're doing, whatever this is, it means something to her." "I'm just being kind," Letitia said. Kindness is never just anything, Walter replied. Thank you. After they left, Mariana materialized at Leticia's elbow. They came back, she observed. Apparently, and you sat with them again. She's a sweet kid. Mm-hmm. And he's a sweet dad? He's grieving. They both are. If sitting with them for a few minutes makes their week a little easier, what's the harm? Mariana was quiet for a long moment. Just be careful, okay? I know you think you're helping them, but make sure you're not setting yourself up for something that's going to hurt when it ends. It's not going to hurt because it's not anything. They'll stop coming eventually. They'll get bored or find somewhere better or realize this diner isn't actually worth the trip, and that will be fine. But even as she said it, Leticia knew it was a lie. They came back the next week, and the week after that. Suddenly, it was a month later. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, like clockwork, Sophie and Walter Scott walked through the door of Riverside Diner. Sophie always got chocolate milk. Walter always got coffee black. The food varied, sometimes pancakes, sometimes grilled cheese. Once an ambitious attempt at meatloaf that Sophie had declared interesting, but not something I need to repeat. But the pattern held, and every time, Letitia sat with them for 15, 20, sometimes 30 minutes, talking about books and school and architecture and whatever randomness Sophie's brilliant, eclectic mind had fixated on that week. She learned things, small details that accumulated into understanding. Walter was a tech entrepreneur, one of those people who'd built something from nothing and sold it for money that defied comprehension. He could have retired at 35, but he kept working because stopping felt like giving up. Sophie was exactly as brilliant as she seemed. She read at a 5th grade level despite being in 1st grade. She had opinions about urban planning and historical preservation. She built elaborate structures out of cardboard and tape and sheer determination. Her mother had died in a car accident 2 years ago. Sudden, brutal, completely random. One day she'd been there, the next day she wasn't. Sophie had been left with a father who loved her desperately but had no idea how to fill the maternal void. They'd tried therapy. They'd tried grief groups. They'd tried nannies and tutors and every professional intervention money could buy. But what helped, apparently, was a waitress in a shabby diner who made good chocolate milk and was willing to sit in a booth and just listen. You're good with her, Walter said one afternoon when Sophie had gone to the restroom. It was the first time he'd initiated a personal conversation when they were alone. She's an easy kid to be good with, Leticia replied. She's smart and funny and kind. She is, Walter agreed. But she's also grieving and complicated, and sometimes she wakes up crying for her mother, and I have no idea how to help her. The vulnerability in his voice caught Leticia off guard. This wasn't the polished businessman paying for lunch. This was a father who was drowning and trying desperately not to let his daughter see. You're doing better than you think, Leticia said quietly. You show up. You listen to her. You let her be weird and brilliant without trying to make her normal. That's more than a lot of parents manage even without the grief. You sound like you have experience with that. Leticia hesitated. She'd been so careful not to offer personal information, to keep this contained and boundaried and safe. But Walter was looking at her with genuine interest, not prying curiosity. Maybe she owed him something. After all these weeks of him trusting her with his daughter. I worked in pediatrics for a while, she said carefully. I saw a lot of kids, a lot of parents, the ones who listened, who showed up, who treated their children like real people instead of projects to manage. Those were the ones whose kids did okay, even through really hard things. Worked in pediatrics, Walter repeated. Past tense. Past tense. He waited, giving her space to elaborate or not. When she didn't, he nodded slowly. We all have our stories, he said. The ones we don't tell at diner tables. We do. Sophie bounded back from the restroom. The moment dissolved, but something had shifted. A recognition, maybe. An acknowledgement that they were both people carrying weight they didn't talk about. The shift happened on a rainy Thursday in October, 3 months after Sophie first asked Leticia to be her mom. They'd settled into their routine so completely that Mariana automatically started preparing Sophie's chocolate milk when she saw Walter's car pull up. Leticia had stopped pretending she didn't look forward to Tuesdays and Thursdays. Sophie had started bringing Leticia drawings and book recommendations and elaborate architectural blueprints for castles that defied physics but captured imagination. But that Thursday, only Walter walked through the door. Leticia's heart dropped before she could stop it. She'd been wiping down the counter. Her hands went still, the cloth dripping water onto the laminate. Is Sophie all right? The question was out before professional distance could stop it. Walter looked surprised, then touched. She's fine. She has a birthday party she couldn't miss. She made me promise to bring her next Tuesday, and also to bring you this. He handed Leticia a folded piece of paper. She opened it to find a crayon drawing of 3 stick figures sitting in a booth, one large with dark hair, presumably Walter, one small with curly hair, Sophie, one medium-sized with a smile, unmistakably Leticia. At the bottom, in Sophie's careful handwriting, my favorite people in my favorite place. She worked on that for 2 hours last night, Walter said quietly. She wanted to get it perfect. Leticia stared at the drawing. Something cracked in her chest. This wasn't professional distance. This wasn't a waitress being kind to a customer. This was a little girl claiming her, declaring her important, making her part of the family narrative. I should probably tell her not to get too attached, Walter said, carefully neutral. I should explain that you have your own life, that this is your workplace, that we can't expect you to keep sitting with us indefinitely. Probably, Leticia agreed, her voice thick. But I don't want to. She looked up, meeting his eyes. There was something there she hadn't let herself see before. Something beyond grief and gratitude. Walter, I know, he said quickly. I know this is complicated. I know I'm a customer and you're working. I know you've been incredibly generous with your time and Sophie is attached, and that's a lot of responsibility you never asked for. That's not what I was going to say. No? Leticia took a breath. This was the moment. She could step back, re-establish boundaries, gently explain that this had gone too far and needed to end before anyone got hurt. Or she could step forward into the terrifying unknown of actual connection. I was going to say that I look forward to Tuesdays and Thursdays, she admitted, that sitting with you and Sophie is the best part of my week, that I haven't let anyone get close to me in 3 years, but somehow a 6-year-old girl asked to be my pancake mom and I forgot to protect myself. Walter's expression transformed. Hope and relief, and something deeper. Can I take you to dinner? He asked. Not here, not as a customer. Somewhere we can actually talk without Sophie as a buffer. I don't think that's a good idea, because you're not interested, or because you're scared. The question was direct, unflinching. Leticia could lie. She'd become very good at lying over the past 3 years, at pretending she was fine and whole and didn't need anyone. Because I'm scared, she said instead. Because I know what loss looks like, Walter. I know what it does to people. And I think you're lonely and Sophie is lonely and I'm convenient and kind, but that's not the same as being what you actually want. You think I'm asking you out because you're convenient? Walter's voice was careful, controlled. Leticia, I have been trying not to notice how beautiful you are for 3 months. I've been telling myself that I'm here for Sophie, that this is about my daughter, that my feelings are just gratitude dressed up as attraction. He paused, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that suggested frustration and vulnerability in equal measure. But the truth is, I think about you when I'm not here. I imagine conversations we haven't had. I catch myself wanting to tell you things that happened during my week, waiting to share them on Tuesday. And yes, I'm grieving. Yes, I'm lonely. Yes, this is complicated. But you're not a convenience. You're someone who makes me want to be better than I've been. The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Leticia felt her careful defenses crumbling. One dinner, she heard herself say. One conversation where we're honest about what this is and what it can't be. When? Sunday. I'm off Sundays. I'll pick you up at 7. Text me your address. He pulled out a business card, writing his personal cell phone number on the back. And Leticia? Thank you. For the drawing response, for sitting with Sophie, for giving me a chance I absolutely don't deserve. You don't know that you don't deserve it, Leticia said. You don't know anything about me except that I make good chocolate milk and I'm nice to your daughter. So, tell me the rest. Sunday. After he left, Leticia stood staring at the business card. Walter Scott's personal number written in precise, controlled handwriting. Mariana appeared at her shoulder. You said yes. I said yes. I thought you weren't going to get involved. I'm not. It's just dinner. Just a conversation. Just you falling for a widower and his daughter despite every instinct telling you to protect yourself. Leticia closed her eyes. Am I being stupid? Maybe. Or maybe you're being brave. I can't tell yet. Sunday came too fast and too slow simultaneously. Letitia changed outfits 4 times before settling on a simple blue dress that was nice without trying too hard. She wore her hair down for the first time in months. Let herself put on makeup that wasn't just presentable for work. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Someone who looked like she might be going on a date. Someone who looked like she might be hoping for something. When Walter knocked on her door at precisely 7, he was holding flowers. Not roses, too romantic, but sunflowers. Thoughtful, cheerful, uncomplicated. "You look beautiful," he said, and it didn't sound like a line. It sounded like an observation, stated as fact. "You look nervous," Letitia replied, accepting the flowers. "I am nervous. I haven't been on an actual date in 4 years." "This is a date, isn't it?" Letitia considered. "I suppose it is." He took her to a small Italian restaurant in a neighborhood she'd never visited. The kind of place that had probably been there for 40 years and would be there for 40 more. They didn't take reservations, and even Walter Scott's money couldn't buy them special treatment. They waited 20 minutes for a table like everyone else, making small talk that felt both awkward and comfortable. Once seated, Walter didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Tell me something true about yourself," he said. "Something you wouldn't normally share with a customer at the diner." Letitia took a sip of wine, buying time. "I used to be a nurse," she said finally. "Pediatric oncology. I was good at it. I loved it." "Used to be?" There was a patient. A little boy named Marcus. He was 7, and he was brilliant and funny and so brave it hurt to watch. He loved dinosaurs and space and terrible puns. I spent 2 years helping him fight leukemia. She paused. The memory rose up with physical force. He didn't make it. And I know that's the risk. I know you can't save everyone. I know intellectually that I did my best and sometimes medicine fails, and it wasn't my fault. But, Walter prompted gently, but I couldn't go back. I couldn't walk into that hospital and see another child in that bed and pour my heart into saving them, knowing they might die anyway. So, I quit. I've been waitressing for 3 years because it doesn't require emotional investment. You serve food, you collect payment, you go home. Nobody dies if you forget the ketchup. Walter was quiet, absorbing this. "I'm sorry about Marcus." "Me too." "And Sophie? Does she remind you of him?" "No," Letitia said honestly. "She's nothing like Marcus except that she's brilliant and vulnerable and deserves someone to show up for her. When she asked me to be her mom, I should have said no. I should have maintained professional distance. But I looked at her, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't be another adult who lets her down. You think sitting with her is setting her up to be let down, isn't it? Eventually this ends, Walter. Your life and my life don't make sense together. You have money and resources in a world I don't understand. I serve coffee in a diner and live in a 3rd-floor walk-up. This isn't a fairy tale. There's no universe where this works long-term. Why not?" The question was so simple, so direct, it stopped her. Because people from different worlds don't just merge their lives. Because you need someone sophisticated who can navigate your social circles. Because Sophie needs a mother who can give her stability and resources and everything I can't provide. Sophie needs someone who sees her, who listens to her, who makes her feel safe. You do all of that. Walter leaned forward, and I don't need someone sophisticated. I need someone real. Do you know how exhausting it is, existing in my world? Everyone wants something. Every conversation is calculating. Every relationship is transactional, except you. You don't know that. Maybe I'm calculating too. Maybe I see a rich man and a lonely daughter and I'm strategizing. You're not, Walter interrupted. I've watched you with Sophie for 3 months. You genuinely care about her. You ask her about her thoughts, not just her day. You remember details from previous conversations. You push back when she's being unfair or illogical. You treat her like a whole person, not a tragedy to be managed. That's not strategy. That's love. The word hung between them, too big and too soon. I'm not saying you love her like a mother, Walter amended quickly, but you love her as a human. You invest in her well-being, and that's more than most people offer. And what about you? Letitia asked. What do you want from me? Honestly, I want to know you. I want to hear about your terrible day and your favorite book, and why you chose sunflowers for our table. I want to introduce you to Sophie properly, not as the pancake mom, but as someone important in both our lives. I want to see if this thing between us is real, or if I'm projecting because I'm lonely. And if you're projecting, then we'll figure it out like adults. But Leticia, I don't think I am. I think I'm falling for someone who is brave and kind, and so carefully defended that it breaks my heart. Leticia felt tears threatening. I can't promise you anything. I can't promise I won't run when this gets too real. I can't promise I'm ready for this. I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking for a chance. For more dinners like this. For conversations that matter. For the possibility that maybe we're both ready for something new, even though we're both terrified. They talked for 3 more hours. About Walter's work and Leticia's lost career. About Sophie's brilliance and grief. About what had broken them both and what they were trying to build from the pieces. The waiter came by twice to ask if they needed anything, clearly wanting to close up. They ordered more wine just to justify staying. Walter told her about his wife, Rebecca, how they'd met in college, how she'd supported his wild entrepreneurial dreams when everyone else thought he was crazy, how she'd been the steady one, the grounded one, the one who made him remember that success meant nothing if you had no one to share it with. She was driving home from a charity event, Walter said, his voice carefully controlled. A truck ran a red light. She died on impact. The police said she didn't suffer, like that's supposed to make it better. Sophie was 4, old enough to understand Mommy wasn't coming home, but too young to understand why. I'm so sorry, Leticia said. The worst part is that we'd fought that morning. Something stupid about my travel schedule. I'd said things I didn't mean because I was frustrated. And then she was gone, and I never got to take them back. That's not your fault. I know that intellectually. But grief doesn't listen to intellect. Leticia reached across the table and took his hand. It was the first time she'd initiated physical contact. His fingers closed around hers like she was anchoring him. Tell me about Marcus, Walter said quietly. The parts you haven't told anyone. So she did. She told him about Marcus's obsession with velociraptors, how he'd corrected everyone's pronunciation constantly, how he'd made her laugh even when he was in pain, how his parents had been so strong, so present, never giving up hope even when the doctors had stopped offering any. She told him about the last day, how Marcus had been calm, almost peaceful, how he'd told her it was okay, that she'd been the best nurse ever, that she shouldn't be sad. He was 7 years old, and he was comforting me, Leticia said, tears streaming down her face now. He was dying, and he was worried about my feelings. And I held his hand and I told him he was so brave. And he said being brave just means you're scared but you do it anyway. Out of the mouths of children, Walter said softly. I left the hospital that day, and I never went back. I called in the next day and quit. My supervisor tried to talk me out of it. She said I was one of the best nurses she'd had, that the kids needed people like me. But I couldn't. I just couldn't. And now? Do you regret it? Every day. I regret that I let fear win. I regret that there are kids who might have benefited from having me there, and I wasn't. I regret that I built my entire life around avoiding pain instead of learning to live with it. Maybe it's not too late, Walter said. Maybe you needed these 3 years to heal. Maybe now you're strong enough to go back. I don't know if I am. I think you are. I think you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. You just don't see it yet. When Walter drove her home, he walked her to her door like they were in a movie from the 1950s. Can I see you again? He asked. Outside the diner? Yes. Thursday, after our usual lunch? I can get my sister to watch Sophie for the evening. Okay. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When his lips met hers, it was gentle, questioning, full of possibility. Leticia felt something inside her that had been frozen for 3 years begin to thaw. Good night, Leticia, he whispered. Good night, Walter. She watched him drive away, then stood in her doorway for 5 full minutes, processing. She was falling for him. Despite every wall, every defense, every logical reason to protect herself, she was falling. And it was terrifying. And it was wonderful. And she had absolutely no idea what came next. The next 2 weeks were a careful dance. Tuesday and Thursday lunches with Sophie, where Leticia sat in their booth and listened to elaborate stories about school projects and playground politics. Thursday and Saturday evenings with Walter, quiet dinners where they talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's rhythms and histories and hopes. They kept the dating separate from Sophie at first, not hiding it exactly, but not advertising it either. Leticia wasn't ready to complicate the simple joy Sophie found in their diner routine. Walter respected that, even though she could tell he wanted to integrate the pieces of his life. On their third date, Leticia asked the question that had been nagging at her. "What do your friends think about this? About you dating the waitress from the diner?" Walter was quiet for a moment. "I don't have many friends," he admitted. "I have business associates. I have people who want things from me. But actual friends? People who care about me and not my bank account? Those are rare. That sounds lonely." "It is. It has been for a long time. Rebecca had friends for both of us. She was the social one, the one who organized dinners and remembered birthdays and made our life feel full. When she died, all of that disappeared. People didn't know what to say to the grieving widower. So they said nothing. They stopped calling. They stopped including me in things. And I let them because I didn't have the energy to maintain relationships that felt performative anyway. And now I'm realizing that I want real connection. I want people in my life who see me, not just what I can do for them. I want Sophie to grow up understanding that relationships are about presence and authenticity, not transactions." He paused, looking at her directly. "You're the first person in 2 years who's treated me like a regular human. You don't care that I have money. You don't ask me for favors or investments. You just sit with my daughter and listen to her talk about flying buttresses and you make her feel seen. Do you have any idea how rare that is? I'm not special, Walter. I'm just being a decent person. That's what makes you special. You think decency is baseline? Most people in my world think it's optional." Their fourth date was different. Walter picked her up but didn't tell her where they were going. They drove for 30 minutes outside the city, to a place Leticia had never been. A botanical garden that was closed to the public, but somehow Walter had access. "How did you manage this?" she asked as they walked through gates that should have been locked. "I donated money for their children's education program. They gave me a key and said I could come whenever I wanted. I haven't used it until tonight." The gardens were ethereal in the darkness. Softly lit pathways wound through plantings that seemed designed for fairy tales. They walked slowly, hands linked, talking less and just being more. In the butterfly conservatory, surrounded by sleeping flowers and the gentle sound of water features, Walter stopped. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to really hear me." "Okay, I'm falling in love with you. I know it's too soon. I know we're supposed to wait longer before saying these things. But I'm 40 years old, and I've learned that life is too short and too uncertain to pretend I don't feel what I feel." He took both her hands in his. "I love you, not because you're good with Sophie, though you are, not because you make me feel less lonely, though you do, but because you're brilliant and brave and you challenge me to be better. You're kind without being weak. You're careful without being closed. You're exactly what I didn't know I needed." Leticia felt her heart hammering. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to protect herself, to retreat before this became too real to survive losing. But she looked at Walter's face, open and vulnerable and terrified, and she realized he was taking the same risk she was. He was handing her his heart, with no guarantee she wouldn't drop it. "I love you too," she heard herself say, "and it terrifies me, because everyone I love leaves or dies or disappoints me, and I don't know if I can survive losing you and Sophie after I've let you in." "Then don't lose us," Walter said. "Stay. Choose this. Choose us. What if I can't be what Sophie needs? What if I fail her? You won't. But even if you struggle, even if it's hard, we'll figure it out together. That's what family does. Family." The word that had felt impossible for 3 years suddenly felt inevitable. "Okay," Leticia whispered. "Okay. I choose this. I choose you. Both of you." Walter pulled her into his arms and she let herself be held. Let herself be vulnerable. Let herself believe that maybe broken things could be rebuilt into something even stronger than before. "Before we continue with what happens next, I need you to understand something. This moment right here, this is what bravery looks like. It's not the absence of fear. It's feeling the fear and choosing love anyway. It's handing someone your broken pieces and trusting them not to cut themselves on the sharp edges." If you've ever been where Leticia is right now, terrified and hopeful at the exact same time, I need you to hit that subscribe button, because we're about to get into the messy middle, the part where choosing love means doing the hard work to keep choosing it every single day. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever fallen in love with someone who came with a whole life you had to fit into? How did that go? Share this video with someone who needs to hear that love is worth the risk. Now let's see what happens when Sophie finds out her pancake mom and her dad are building something real. Sophie found out about the dating 2 weeks later, not because anyone told her, but because she was 6 and brilliant and noticed everything. They were in the usual booth on a Tuesday. Leticia had sat down for her customary visit. But this time, when Walter's hand brushed hers reaching for the cream, Sophie's eyes narrowed. "Are you dating my dad?" she asked bluntly. Leticia and Walter froze. They hadn't discussed how to handle this conversation. They'd been existing in a bubble where Tuesday and Thursday lunches were separate from the Thursday and Saturday evening dates they'd been carefully keeping private. "Yes," Walter said, because lying to Sophie was not an option. "We are. Is that okay?" Sophie was quiet for a long moment. Her brilliant mind was visibly processing. "Are you going to marry him?" she asked Leticia. "We've only been dating for 2 weeks," Leticia said carefully. "Marriage is a very big step that comes much later. But you might." "I don't know, Sophie. Maybe. The future is complicated. If you marry my dad, would you be my real mom?" The question hit Leticia like a physical blow. She looked at Walter, who looked equally devastated by the hope in his daughter's voice. "If we got married," Leticia said slowly, "I would be your stepmother, which means I would love you and take care of you and be a parent to you. But I wouldn't replace your mother. Nobody replaces mothers. They add to the love that's already there." Sophie considered this with her characteristic seriousness. "I don't remember my mom very well anymore. That makes me sad. But when I'm with you, I don't feel as lonely." "Is that bad?" "No, sweetheart. That's not bad at all." "Okay, then you can date my dad." "But, Leticia?" "Yes? You have to promise not to leave. My mom left, and it wasn't her fault, but I can't have another mom leave. It would break something inside me that I don't think would fix." The weight of that statement crushed down on all of them. Walter reached for Sophie's hand. Leticia felt panic rising in her throat. "Sophie," she said, forcing herself to be honest, "I can't promise I'll never leave. Life is unpredictable, and sometimes things don't work out the way we hope." Sophie's face crumpled, but Leticia continued quickly, "I can promise that if I leave, it will only be because staying would hurt all of us more. I can promise I won't leave casually, or because things get hard, or because I get bored. I can promise that right now, in this moment, I want to be here. Is that enough?" Sophie thought about this. "I guess it has to be, because that's the only kind of promise that's true, right? The kind that's about right now?" "You're very wise," Leticia said. "I know," Sophie replied, with the confidence of a child who'd been told this her whole life. "Can I still call you my pancake mom?" "Always." After they left that day, Leticia sat in the employee break room with her head in her hands. Mariana found her there 20 minutes later. "That bad?" Mariana asked. "She asked me not to leave her, and I couldn't promise I wouldn't. Because you think you will? Because I have a track record of running when things get too real. Because I'm terrified of being responsible for a child's emotional well-being. Because what if I become essential to her life, and then I can't handle it? What if I'm like I was at the hospital, pouring everything into someone and then collapsing when it becomes too much? Or," Mariana said gently, "what if you're different now? What if 3 years of protecting yourself taught you how to be strong enough to actually connect?" "How do I know?" "You don't. That's what makes it brave." Over the next month, the separate parts of Leticia's life began to merge. She started spending more time with Sophie outside the diner, Saturday afternoons at the museum, Sunday morning farmers markets where Sophie took her job as produce selector very seriously, quiet evenings at Walter's house where Leticia would help with homework while Walter cooked dinner. She met Walter's sister Caroline, who was skeptical at first but warmed up when she saw how Sophie lit up around Leticia. She met his business partner James, who clearly didn't understand what a tech millionaire was doing with a waitress but was polite enough not to say so directly. And slowly, carefully, Leticia let them into her life too. Walter met Mariana, who interrogated him thoroughly and declared him acceptable but on probation. Sophie came to Leticia's tiny apartment and declared it cozy, which was a 6-year-old's way of saying small but loved. 3 months after that first date, Walter asked Leticia to move in with them. They were in his kitchen. Sophie was asleep upstairs. Leticia was washing dishes while Walter dried, a domestic rhythm they'd fallen into without discussion. "I know it's fast," Walter said. "I know you need your own space and independence, and I'm not trying to rush you into anything you're not ready for. But But Sophie asks every week when you're going to live with us, and I wake up every morning wishing you were there. And it feels ridiculous that you're paying rent on an apartment you barely use when you could be here with us." Leticia set down the plate she was washing. "What if it doesn't work? What if we drive each other crazy? What if living together ruins what we have? What if it doesn't? What if it's exactly what we all need?" She thought about her apartment, the sparse furniture, the lack of personal items, the way it never felt like home, just a place she slept between shifts. She thought about Walter's house, warm and lived in, and full of Sophie's artwork. She thought about belonging somewhere, to someone. "Okay," she said. "Okay, let's try." Walter's smile was incandescent. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her like she'd given him the world. Maybe she had. Moving in was easier than Leticia expected. She didn't have much to move. 3 years of avoiding attachment meant she'd never accumulated the normal debris of living. Her clothes fit in 2 suitcases, her books in 3 boxes. Everything else was either donated or thrown away. Sophie helped her unpack with the seriousness of someone performing a sacred duty. She'd already cleared space in her closet for Leticia's things, already made room in the bathroom for her toiletries. "Now you'll be here every day," Sophie said, arranging Leticia's books on the shelf with careful precision. "Now you'll be here for breakfast and dinner and bedtime stories and everything." "Is that what you want?" Leticia asked. "More than anything." "What about your mom? Your first mom? Are you okay with me being here?" Sophie paused, considering. "My first mom would want me to be happy. I think she'd like you. You're both the kind of people who notice details and make sure things are done right." The observation was so mature, so thoughtful, that Leticia had to turn away to hide her tears. That first week of living together was an adjustment, learning each other's rhythms and habits, discovering that Walter was a morning person who woke up cheerful and talkative, while Leticia needed 30 minutes and 2 cups of coffee before she could form coherent sentences. Finding out that Sophie had nightmares sometimes, and the only thing that helped was someone sitting with her in the dark, not talking, just being present. Leticia learned to navigate the space between being a parental figure and being the fun adult. She learned when to enforce bedtime and when to allow 10 more minutes of reading. She learned the difference between Sophie's "I'm tired" tantrum and her "I'm genuinely overwhelmed" meltdown. And Walter learned that Leticia needed time alone sometimes, that she would disappear into the guest room with a book and closed door, and that didn't mean she was angry or pulling away. It just meant her introvert battery needed recharging. They fought, small skirmishes about dishes in the sink and whose turn it was to do laundry, and whether Sophie should be allowed unlimited screen time on weekends. But they also learned to repair, to apologize, to talk through frustration instead of letting it fester. 2 months after Leticia moved in, Walter proposed. It wasn't elaborate or public. No restaurant flash mob or jumbotron declaration. Just the 3 of them in the backyard on a Sunday afternoon. Sophie was building an elaborate fort out of cardboard boxes. Leticia was reading. Walter was supposedly gardening but was mostly just watching them both. "Leticia," he said quietly. She looked up from her book. He was holding a small velvet box. Sophie had abandoned her fort and was vibrating with barely contained excitement. "I had this whole speech planned," Walter said, "about how you've changed our lives and made us whole again and all of that. But the truth is simpler. I love you. Sophie loves you. We want you to stay forever, not just until the lease runs out or until things get hard. We want you to be family, officially and legally and permanently." He opened the box. The ring inside was simple, elegant, exactly her style. "Will you marry me?" Leticia looked at Sophie, who was nodding encouragingly. She looked at Walter, vulnerable and hopeful. She looked at the house they'd made into a home together. She thought about all the reasons to say no, all the ways this could fail, all the risks of saying yes. And then she thought about Marcus's words. "Being brave just means you're scared, but you do it anyway." "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." Sophie shrieked and launched herself at Leticia, nearly knocking her over. Walter was laughing and crying at the same time. They stood there in the backyard, the 3 of them, holding each other, and Leticia felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Complete, not because she needed them to be whole, but because choosing them, daily and deliberately, made her more fully herself. That night after Sophie was asleep, Leticia and Walter sat on the back porch looking at stars. "Are you happy?" Walter asked. "Terrified and grateful and overwhelmed and happier than I've been in years," Leticia replied. all simultaneously. Is that normal? I think that's exactly how it's supposed to feel. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Letitia spoke. I've been thinking about something, about what you said that first night at dinner, about maybe going back to nursing. And I'm not ready for pediatric oncology. I don't know if I'll ever be ready for that, but maybe pediatric general care, maybe working with kids who have broken bones and ear infections and routine things, building up my tolerance again. I think that's a great idea. I already reached out to my old supervisor. She connected me with the head of pediatrics at Denver General. They have an opening. I have an interview next week. Walter took her hand. I'm proud of you. I haven't gotten the job yet. I'm proud of you for trying, for being brave enough to go back to something that hurt you. Being brave just means you're scared, but you do it anyway, Letitia said softly. Smart kid, that Marcus. The smartest. Letitia got the job. She started 2 weeks later, easing back into nursing with a mixture of terror and relief. The first day she walked into the pediatric ward, she almost turned around and left. The sounds, the smells, the sight of small bodies in hospital beds, it all came rushing back. But then a little girl with a broken arm asked her if she liked unicorns. And Letitia heard herself saying yes, she loved unicorns. What was the little girl's favorite color? And just like that, she was doing it, being a nurse again, connecting with kids, letting herself care while maintaining the boundaries that would keep her functional. It was hard. Some days she came home emotionally exhausted, needing to retreat to the guest room for an hour before she could be present for dinner. But Walter understood. Sophie understood. They gave her space when she needed it, and presence when she needed that instead. 3 months before the wedding, Letitia had her first real crisis. There was a patient, a little boy named Devon, who was 8 and had been admitted for what they thought was pneumonia. But the scans showed something worse. A mass in his lung that needed further investigation. Possible cancer. Too early to know for sure. Letitia knew she should hand the case to someone else. Knew she wasn't ready for this. But Devon had attached himself to her with a single-minded devotion that scared children sometimes develop for the person who makes them feel safest. She stayed on the case, helped run the tests, held his hand during the scary procedures, talked to his parents who were trying so hard to be strong while falling apart inside. The biopsy came back benign, a rare infection that mimicked cancer but was treatable with antibiotics. Devon would be fine. Letitia barely made it to the staff bathroom before she started sobbing. 3 years of grief, of running, of protecting herself, it all came pouring out. She cried for Marcus. She cried for Devon who'd been spared. She cried for all the children who wouldn't be spared. She cried until there was nothing left. When she finally emerged, her supervisor was waiting. You okay? Dr. Patterson asked. I don't know, Letitia admitted. You want to talk about it? So Letitia told her. About Marcus, about quitting, about the 3 years of running, about coming back and trying to be okay and discovering that maybe she wasn't as healed as she'd thought. Dr. Patterson listened without interrupting. Then she spoke carefully. You know what I see when I look at you? Someone who cares so much it hurts. Someone who pours everything into her patients because she can't do it halfway. That's your gift, Letitia. It's also your burden. You have to figure out how to carry it without letting it crush you. How? Therapy helps. Boundaries help. Having people in your life who ground you helps. But mostly you just have to decide that the pain of caring is worth it because the alternative is being numb, and numb isn't living. Letitia went home that night and told Walter everything. About Devon, about the breakdown in the bathroom, about her fear that she wasn't strong enough to be a nurse and a partner and a parent all at the same time. Walter listened. Then he said something that changed everything. You don't have to be strong all the time. That's what we're here for. Let us hold you up when you can't hold yourself. So, she did. She let herself be vulnerable. Let herself need them. Let Sophie climb into her lap and pat her back and say, there, like Letitia had done for her 100 times. Let Walter hold her while she cried. Let them see her broken and trusted them not to leave. And they didn't leave. They stayed. They chose her even when she wasn't okay. Maybe especially when she wasn't okay. The next day, Letitia called a therapist, started doing the work of actually processing Marcus's death instead of just running from it. It was painful and slow and necessary. Over the next few months, she learned things. That grief doesn't have a timeline. that healing isn't linear, that you can love someone new without forgetting someone you lost, that being afraid doesn't disqualify you from being brave. She learned to talk about Marcus without falling apart, to celebrate his memory instead of being destroyed by it. She started a small scholarship fund at the hospital in his name for families struggling with pediatric cancer costs. And slowly, piece by piece, she rebuilt herself into someone who could hold both grief and joy, who could work with sick children and come home to her family, who could be scared and brave at the exact same time. 2 weeks before the wedding, Sophie had a nightmare. Not her usual anxiety dreams, but something deeper. Letitia woke to the sound of sobbing and found Sophie curled up in bed, clutching her elephant, tears streaming down her face. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Letitia asked, climbing into bed beside her. "What if you disappear like my first mom?" Sophie sobbed. "What if the wedding happens and then you're gone? What if I lose you?" "Oh, Sophie." Letitia held her while she cried, all the fear and loss and vulnerability pouring out. "I can't promise I'll never disappear," Letitia said when the sobs had quieted. "I wish I could. But life is uncertain, and none of us know what's going to happen tomorrow." "That's not helpful," Sophie said, her voice muffled against Letitia's shoulder. "I know. But here's what I can promise. Right now, in this moment, I am choosing you. Tomorrow I'll choose you again. And the day after that, and every day after that for as long as I'm able. I will choose you every single day, and that's the only kind of promise that's true." Sophie pulled back to look at her. "That's what you said in the diner. The first time I asked you not to leave. You remember that?" "I remember everything about that day. It was when I got my pancake mom." "And you still have your pancake mom," Letitia said. "You'll always have your pancake mom, even after the wedding when you're my real mom?" "Especially then." Sophie snuggled back against her. "Tell me about the wedding. Tell me about all the ways it's going to be perfect." So Letitia did. She described the small ceremony they'd planned, the garden venue Sophie had helped choose, the purple flowers because Sophie insisted, the cake tasting where Sophie had taken extensive notes, the dress Letitia had found with Sophie's approval. "And you'll be the most important person there," Letitia said, "because without you, none of this would have happened. You asked me to be your mom. You were brave enough to ask a stranger for what you needed. That started everything. I was brave, the bravest." Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm glad I was brave. I'm glad I asked you. I'm glad you said yes." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." They fell asleep like that, tangled together. When Walter found them in the morning, he took a picture. Later, he would have it framed, a reminder of the family they'd chosen to become. The wedding was perfect in the way that real things are perfect. Not flawless, but meaningful. It rained in the morning, but cleared by afternoon. The flowers were slightly wilted, but Sophie declared them more interesting that way. The string quartet was late, but it didn't matter because everyone was too happy to care about schedules. Letitia walked down the aisle alone because this wasn't about being given away. This was about choosing. She wore a simple dress and carried sunflowers. Sophie walked beside her in a purple dress, taking her role as flower girl and ring bearer seriously, because as she'd explained, she was important enough to be both. The ceremony was short. They'd written their own vows. Walter promised to show up every day, to listen even when the truth was hard, to be present through joy and grief, to choose their family over his work, to love Letitia not despite her walls, but because of the courage it took to let them down. Letitia promised to be brave, to stay even when she was scared, to let herself be known, to show up for Sophie not just as the fun adult, but as a real parent, to build a life with Walter that honored the past while creating new future. And Sophie, who nobody had asked to speak, stood up and made her own declaration. "I promise to remind you both to be brave when you forget. I promise to tell you when you're being ridiculous. I promise to share my chocolate milk secrets. And I promise to always remember that family is about choosing each other every day." There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. At the reception, Mariana gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry. 3 years ago, she said, Letitia was the most closed-off person I'd ever met. She came to work, did her job, went home. She didn't connect. She didn't hope. She just survived. And then a little girl asked her an impossible question, and she said yes. That yes changed everything. So here's to impossible questions. Here's to saying yes, even when you're terrified. Here's to pancake moms and vanilla secrets and the kind of love that rebuilds you into something stronger than you were before. Later, Leticia and Walter had a quiet moment alone, while Sophie was showing all the guests her meticulously organized wedding planner notebook. "Any regrets?" Walter asked. "Only that I almost said no," Leticia replied. "But you didn't." "But I didn't." They stood together watching their wedding guests, watching Sophie hold court, watching the life they'd built from broken pieces and brave choices. "You know what the best part is?" Leticia said. "What?" "I'm not scared anymore. Or I am, but it doesn't matter. Because being scared and being happy can exist at the same time. Because love is worth the risk. Because you and Sophie are worth every moment of terror." Walter pulled her close. "We're pretty lucky, aren't we?" "The luckiest." The honeymoon phase lasted about 3 weeks. Then real life set in with all its messy, complicated beauty. Married life meant navigating new territory. Leticia was now legally Sophie's stepmother, which came with responsibilities she hadn't fully anticipated. School forms that required her signature, permission slips she had authority to sign. Teachers who called her mom during parent conferences, until Sophie gently corrected them with stepmother, but the good kind. It meant merging finances with Walter, which terrified her. He wanted to add her to his accounts, wanted her to have access to everything. She insisted on keeping her nursing salary separate, maintaining some independence even as she accepted that his wealth was now technically hers too. It meant small domestic wars about things that didn't matter, whether the dishwasher should be loaded with cups on top or bottom, whether shoes belonged by the front door or in the closet, whether Sophie's bedtime could be negotiated on weekends. Their first real fight as a married couple happened on a Tuesday night, 6 weeks after the wedding. Leticia had worked a double shift. A staffing shortage meant she'd been at the hospital for 16 hours with only a 30-minute break. She came home exhausted, desperate for a shower and sleep. She found the kitchen a disaster, dishes piled in the sink, Sophie's art projects spread across the table, Walter's laptop and papers covering every available surface. Walter was on a conference call in his office. Sophie was in the living room, surrounded by homework she clearly hadn't started despite promising she would. Something in Leticia snapped. "Sophie," she said, her voice tight. "What did I ask you to do before I left this morning?" "Homework," Sophie said without looking up from her tablet. "And did you do it?" "Not yet." "It's 8:30. You have school tomorrow. Why isn't your homework done?" "I forgot." "You forgot, or you chose to do other things instead." Sophie finally looked up, recognizing the tone. "I got distracted. I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't help when you have 3 assignments due tomorrow and it's past your bedtime." "I said I'm sorry." Sophie's voice was getting defensive. "Why are you being mean?" "I'm not being mean. I'm being a parent. There's a difference. You're not my real parent. My real mom would understand." The words hit Leticia like a physical blow. She stood there, stunned into silence. Sophie's face immediately crumpled with regret. "I didn't mean that," Sophie whispered. "Leticia, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it." But the damage was done. Leticia felt 3 years of walls trying to slam back into place, protecting her, reminding her that this wasn't real, that she was playing house with someone else's family, that she'd never really belong. "Finish your homework," she said flatly. "I'm going to take a shower." She retreated to the bedroom and locked the door, stood under scalding water until her skin turned red, let the tears mix with the shower spray so she could pretend she wasn't falling apart. When she finally emerged, Walter was sitting on the bed waiting for her. "Sophie told me what she said," he began. "I don't want to talk about it, Leticia. She didn't mean it." "I know she didn't mean it. Kids say things when they're upset. It's fine." "It's not fine. You're upset. I'm tired. That's all. It was a long shift, and I came home to chaos, and I overreacted." "It's fine." "Stop saying it's fine when it's clearly not." And that's when Leticia's careful control broke. "What do you want me to say, Walter? That it hurts? That every time I start to feel like I actually belong here, something reminds me that I'm not her real mother? That no matter how much I love her, I'll always be the replacement? That I'm terrified of messing her up because I have no idea what I'm doing?" She was crying now, past the point of hiding it. "I worked 16 hours today. I held the hand of a 9-year-old girl while they put in 4 because she was scared. I consulted on 3 cases, mentored 2 new nurses, and spent my lunch break calling insurance companies for a family that can't afford their kids' medication. And I came home wanting just one thing to be easy. Just one thing to not require me to be strong and capable and together. Walter tried to reach for her, but she pulled away. And I know that's not fair. I know you and Sophie didn't do anything wrong. I know I'm the one with the problem. But I am so tired of having to prove I belong here. To everyone at the hospital who treats me like the help because I don't have the degrees the other nurses have. To your business friends who look at me like I'm a gold digger. To your late wife's family who make it very clear I'll never measure up. And now to Sophie, who's right. I'm not her real mother. I'm just the waitress who said yes to being a pancake mom and somehow ended up here. The speech left her hollow. She sat on the edge of the bed, depleted. Walter was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke carefully. You're right. You're not Rebecca. You'll never be Rebecca. And thank God for that. Leticia looked up, startled. I loved Rebecca. I will always love Rebecca. She was Sophie's mother and she was my wife, and her loss broke us both in ways we're still healing from. But Leticia, I didn't marry you to replace her. I married you because you're you, because you're fierce and careful and brave in ways Rebecca never had to be. Because you chose us when you had every reason to protect yourself. Because you love Sophie enough to call her out when she's wrong, not just make everything easy. He moved closer, not touching but present. Sophie said what she said because she's 8 and scared and testing boundaries. That's what kids do. They find your weak spot and they poke at it to see if you'll leave. She's been abandoned once. She's terrified it'll happen again. So she's trying to make it happen on her terms, where she has control. I know that intellectually, but it still hurts. But it still hurts, Leticia agreed. So, let it hurt. Be mad at her. Be tired and overwhelmed. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be here. What if I can't do this? What if I'm not strong enough? Then we'll figure it out together. That's what the vows meant. Not that you'd be perfect, that we'd show up for each other even when it's hard. There was a soft knock on the door. Sophie's small voice filtered through. Leticia? Can I come in? Walter looked at Leticia. She nodded. He opened the door. Sophie stood there in her pajamas, eyes red from crying, clutching her elephant. She looked small and scared and heartbroken. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't mean what I said. You are my real mom. Not the same as my first mom, but real. You make me lunch and help with homework and sit with me when I'm scared, and remember how I like things. That's real. That's what moms do. She crossed to the bed and climbed up beside Leticia. I was mad because you were right, and I didn't want to do my homework, so I said the meanest thing I could think of. But I didn't mean it. I love you. Please don't leave. Leticia pulled Sophie into her arms, holding her tight. I'm not leaving, she whispered. I'm tired, and I had a bad day, and I handled it wrong. But I'm not leaving. We're family. Family fights sometimes. That doesn't mean we stop being family. Promise? Promise. They sat there, the 3 of them on the bed, a family that had chosen each other and was learning what that meant. The good parts and the hard parts, and everything in between. Later, after Sophie was asleep, Walter and Leticia talked until 2 in the morning. About expectations and fears, and the work of blending a family. About needing to be better at communicating before they hit the breaking point. About the fact that Leticia was carrying too much and needed to ask for help instead of trying to be superhuman. I'll talk to the hospital about reducing my hours, Leticia said. I can't keep doing doubles. It's not sustainable. And I'll be more present at home, Walter said. I've been too focused on work again, falling into old patterns. We need better balance. They made plans, real concrete plans about division of labor and mental load, and making sure nobody was drowning while trying to keep everyone else afloat. And Leticia made an appointment with her therapist because clearly she had more work to do around feeling like she belonged, around believing that she deserved the life she'd built. 2 months later, Leticia discovered she was pregnant. She'd been feeling off for weeks, tired in a way that felt different from work exhaustion, nauseous at random times. Her period was late, but her cycle had never been perfectly regular, so she hadn't thought much of it. Then Mariana mentioned that she looked green and maybe she should see a doctor. And Leticia took a pregnancy test in the staff bathroom at the hospital, and her whole world tilted. She stared at the 2 pink lines, her mind racing. She was 41 years old. She'd never planned on having biological children. She'd assumed Sophie would be her only experience of motherhood. The idea of pregnancy, of infancy, of starting over with a baby, it was overwhelming and terrifying and unexpected. She told Walter that night after Sophie was in bed. Just handed him the test without saying anything. His face went through a complicated journey. Shock, joy, fear, wonder. He looked at her, trying to read her reaction. "How do you feel?" he asked carefully. "I don't know," Letitia admitted. "Terrified? Happy? Both? I wasn't expecting this. We didn't plan this. Do you want this?" It was the right question. Not assuming, not projecting. Just asking. "I think so," Letitia said slowly. "I think yes. But I'm scared. I'm 41. I've never done this before. What if something goes wrong? What if I can't handle Sophie and a baby? What if I'm a terrible mother to a biological child because I didn't have enough practice?" Walter pulled her close. "What if everything goes right? What if you're exactly as good at this as you are at everything else? What if this is the universe giving us something we didn't know we needed? We need to tell Sophie." They told her the next morning at breakfast. Sophie's reaction was immediate and emphatic. "I'm going to be a big sister? Really? Really, really? Really, really," Letitia confirmed. Sophie launched into immediate planning mode. The baby would need a crib and a name, and she would teach them everything. About dragons and architecture and how to properly organize a bookshelf. She had opinions about nursery colors and whether babies should be allowed to have pacifiers and a detailed timeline for when the baby would be old enough to appreciate her wisdom. Watching her, Letitia felt something settle. This was going to be okay. Chaotic and overwhelming, but okay. The pregnancy was hard. Letitia's body, at 41, did not take kindly to the hormones and changes. She was sick constantly for the first trimester, exhausted beyond measure. The hospital gave her lighter duties, but she still pushed herself too hard, trying to prove she could handle everything. At 16 weeks, she started spotting. Light at first, then heavier. She was at work when it happened, felt the wetness, and looked down to see blood seeping through her scrubs. The panic was immediate and all-consuming. She barely made it to the emergency department before the tears started. They admitted her immediately, ran tests, did an ultrasound while she gripped Walter's hand hard enough to leave marks. The baby was fine. Healthy heartbeat, normal development. The spotting was concerning but not necessarily dangerous. They put her on bed rest for 2 weeks and told her to reduce her stress. But the scare changed something in Letitia, reminded her that nothing was guaranteed, that you could do everything right and still lose what you loved. That control was an illusion. She spent 2 weeks on the couch, Sophie bringing her books and snacks and providing entertainment. Walter working from home to be nearby. Mariana visiting with diner gossip and chocolate milk made the right way. And Letitia had time to think about what she was building, about the family she'd created, about the fact that she'd spent 3 years running from loss and had somehow ended up choosing it anyway, choosing to love people she could lose, choosing to be vulnerable, choosing risk over safety. The spotting stopped. The pregnancy continued. At 20 weeks, they found out they were having a girl. Sophie was thrilled. Another girl for the family, someone she could teach and protect and guide. "What should we name her?" Walter asked. Sophie had immediate opinions. Dragon names, architect names, names of queens and warriors and women who built castles. But that night, alone with Walter, Letitia said quietly, "What about Rebecca?" As a middle name. So Sophie always knows we're honoring her first mother. So she knows she doesn't have to choose between us. Walter's eyes filled with tears. "Rebecca would have loved you," he said. "She would have loved how you love our daughter, not his daughter, not Sophie, our daughter, the language of family." They named the baby Emma Rebecca Scott. Emma for new beginnings, Rebecca for the past they honored, Scott for the family they'd all chosen to become. Emma arrived 3 weeks early on a Tuesday afternoon. Letitia's water broke while she was helping Sophie with homework. They barely made it to the hospital in time. The labor was fast and intense and terrifying and beautiful. Sophie wasn't allowed in the delivery room, but she was the first person besides Walter to hold her new sister. She sat in the hospital bed next to Letitia, cradling Emma with fierce concentration. "She's so small," Sophie whispered. "I promise to protect you always. I promise to teach you everything. I promise to be the best big sister ever." Leticia watched her two daughters together and felt something she'd thought she'd never feel again. Complete. Not because the pieces had been there all along, but because broken things had been rebuilt into something new and strong. If you're still with me, if you've followed Leticia's journey from that first day in the diner to this moment holding her newborn daughter, I need you to understand what you're witnessing. This is what transformation looks like. Not a straight line from broken to healed, but a messy, complicated journey through fear and risk and choosing love anyway. Hit that like button if this story is speaking to something in you. Subscribe to Mr. Dawson Long Stories because we believe in telling the truth about being human. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to choose differently. Drop a comment and tell me what would you'd do if you got a second chance at the life you thought you'd lost. Now let's see what happens when Leticia has to face her biggest fear one more time. The crisis came when Emma was 6 months old. Leticia had returned to work part-time, still nursing, still exhausted, but desperate for the identity that came from being more than just a mother. She loved her daughters fiercely, but she also needed the part of herself that was a healer, a professional, someone who made a difference beyond her own family. She was assigned to a new patient, a little boy named Cameron who was 7 years old. He'd been brought in with what looked like a severe flu, but the tests revealed something worse: leukemia, aggressive and fast-moving and requiring immediate intervention. Leticia knew she should hand the case to someone else, knew she wasn't ready for this, but Cameron had latched onto her the way Marcus had, trusted her, asked for her specifically. His parents were young and terrified, and they needed someone who could guide them through the nightmare they'd stumbled into. So Leticia stayed on the case. She told herself she was healed enough. That 3 years of therapy and a new family had made her strong enough to do this without breaking. She was wrong. Cameron was smart and funny, and so brave it hurt to watch. He cracked jokes during chemo. He talked about what he wanted to be when he grew up. Never if, always when. He made Leticia promise she'd be there for his first day of 3rd grade if he missed the start of the school year. His parents were a wreck. His mother cried constantly, trying to hide it from Cameron but failing. His father oscillated between angry denial and desperate bargaining. They fought in the hallways, made impossible demands of the medical staff, fell apart in ways that were completely understandable and utterly exhausting. And Leticia held them together. She explained the treatment protocols. She advocated for Cameron with the oncology team. She sat with him during the scary procedures. She brought him books about space and dinosaurs. She became essential to his care and his family's survival. She also stopped sleeping, stopped eating properly, started having panic attacks in the staff bathroom, started seeing Marcus's face every time she looked at Cameron. Walter noticed. Of course he noticed. He asked her gently if she was okay, if she needed to step back from the case. She insisted she was fine. She could handle it. She was a professional. Sophie noticed too. Started being extra good, extra quiet, like she was trying not to add to whatever was breaking her stepmother. Emma, oblivious and infant, was the only one who demanded Leticia's full attention. Nursing meant Leticia had to stop, had to be present, had to take care of herself enough to take care of her baby. The breaking point came 3 weeks into Cameron's treatment. Leticia was at the hospital for what was supposed to be a short shift, just checking on Cameron, reviewing his labs, talking to his parents. But Cameron had developed a fever, a dangerous complication that meant possible infection, possible sepsis, possible everything going wrong very fast. They rushed him to intensive care, started aggressive antibiotics, called in the full oncology team. Leticia stayed because she'd promised Cameron she'd be there, because his mother was hysterical and his father was frozen and someone needed to be the calm one. She stood outside the ICU for 6 hours, waiting for updates, watching through the window as they worked on him, reliving every moment of Marcus's final days, feeling the old grief and the new fear tangling together until she couldn't tell them apart. Cameron stabilized. The antibiotics worked. The crisis passed. He would be okay. And Leticia walked calmly to the staff locker room, locked herself in, and completely fell apart. It wasn't crying. It was something deeper. A total collapse of every defense she'd built. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't remember how to exist in a world where children got sick, and sometimes they died and you could do everything right and still lose them. Dr. Patterson found her 40 minutes later, still locked in, still hyperventilating, completely unreachable. They had to call Walter to come get her, had to sedate her enough to get her out of the locker room and into a car. Had to drive her home while she stared at nothing and shook. Walter put her to bed, called her therapist, arranged emergency childcare for Sophie and Emma, sat beside her bed all night, watching her sleep the drugged sleep of someone whose system is shut down. When Leticia woke the next morning, she knew something had to change. Walter was sitting in the chair by the window, Emma asleep on his chest. He looked exhausted and worried and like he'd aged 10 years overnight. "I can't do this," Leticia said, her voice rough. "I thought I could. I thought I was strong enough, but I'm not." "Okay," Walter said simply. Okay. So we figure out what you can do, what you need, how to make this sustainable. I have to quit. I can't work with kids anymore. I thought I could, but I can't. Okay, just okay. You're not going to try to talk me out of it? Leticia, I watched you have a complete breakdown last night. I'm not going to tell you to go back to something that's destroying you. We'll figure out something else. But nursing is who I am. No, Walter said firmly. Nursing is what you do. Who you are is so much more than your job. You're a mother, a wife, a person who cares deeply and loves fiercely. And sometimes that means you have to protect yourself from the things that will break you. Leticia started crying again, quieter this time. I feel like I'm failing, like I'm weak because I can't handle this. You're not weak. You're human. There's a difference. She took a leave of absence from the hospital. 6 months to figure out what came next. To actually do the work of grieving Marcus instead of just managing around it. To learn the difference between healing and just surviving. Her therapist was blunt. You've been running for 3 years. You stopped long enough to build a family, but you never actually dealt with the trauma. Now it's dealing with you. So, Leticia dealt with it. Really dealt with it. She joined a support group for medical professionals who'd lost patients. She started EMDR therapy for the PTSD she'd been pretending didn't exist. She wrote letters to Marcus that she never sent, saying all the things she'd needed to say. She cried. A lot. For Marcus. For Cameron, who'd survived but reminded her of what she'd lost. For all the children she couldn't save. For the career she'd thought defined her. For the person she'd been before loss had changed her. And slowly, painfully, she started to rebuild. Not back to who she'd been, but into someone new. Someone who could hold grief and joy simultaneously. Someone who understood that loving people meant risking loss, but the love was worth it anyway. 4 months into her leave, she had an idea. She was at home with Emma, who was starting to crawl and get into everything. Sophie was at school. Walter was working. And Leticia was reading an article about the lack of support services for families of pediatric patients. She thought about Cameron's parents, how lost they'd been, how much they'd needed not just medical care but emotional support, someone to explain the impossible jargon, someone to sit with them in the waiting room, someone to just witness their fear. She thought about all the families she'd seen over the years, the ones who had to choose between staying at the hospital with their sick child and working to keep their insurance. The ones who couldn't afford parking or cafeteria food. The ones who fell apart because no one told them it was okay to fall apart. She called Walter into the kitchen where she was surrounded by notes and research. I have an idea, she said, and I need your honest opinion before I get too attached to it. Tell me. I want to start a foundation, not a medical foundation, but a support foundation for families of pediatric patients. We could provide things insurance doesn't cover. Parking vouchers, meal cards, gas money for parents who have to travel for treatment, maybe even grants for lost wages, and counseling. Free counseling for parents and siblings who are watching someone they love fight for their life. She paused, watching his reaction. I know it would be expensive. I know I have no idea how to run a nonprofit. I know it might be impossible, but I can't shake the feeling that this is what I'm supposed to do with everything I've learned. Use my nursing knowledge and my experience with Marcus to help people who are where I was. Walter was quiet for a moment. Then, he smiled. How much do you need to start? What? How much capital do you need to get this off the ground? I'll fund it. Initial operating costs, first-year salaries, whatever you need. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm offering. Leticia, you've spent 3 years thinking your nursing career was over, but this is nursing. Just a different kind, using your expertise to heal families, not just patients. It's perfect. It might fail. It might. But it also might help thousands of people. That's worth the risk. They called it the Marcus Foundation. in memory of the little boy who'd taught Leticia that being brave meant being scared, but doing it anyway. Leticia threw herself into building it with the same intensity she'd once brought to nursing. She researched nonprofit structures, consulted with hospital administrators, interviewed families about what they actually needed, built a board of directors that included Dr. Patterson and 2 other pediatric professionals and 3 parents who'd lost children. The foundation launched 9 months after Leticia's breakdown. They started small. 1 hospital, 3 staff members, a modest budget that Walter had provided, but Leticia was determined to supplement with grants and fundraising. The first family they helped was Cameron's. His treatment had been successful, but had bankrupted his parents. The foundation paid off their medical debt and provided 6 months of counseling for the whole family. Cameron's mother hugged Leticia and cried. "You saved us twice," she said. "Once by taking care of our son, and now by helping us survive what came after." Within a year, the foundation had expanded to 3 hospitals. They'd helped 200 families. They'd partnered with other organizations to provide comprehensive support. They'd created a model that other cities wanted to replicate. And Leticia had found her purpose. Not the purpose she'd imagined when she first became a nurse, but something deeper, using her pain to prevent other people's pain, transforming her loss into other people's gain. She still had hard days. Days when a case reminded her too much of Marcus. Days when the grief rose up unexpected and overwhelming. But she'd learned to ride those waves instead of drowning in them, to feel her feelings without being destroyed by them, to ask for help when she needed it. 3 years after the foundation launched, Leticia stood on a stage at a hospital fundraiser telling her story. Sophie was in the audience, now 11 years old and brilliant and confident. Emma was 3, sitting on Walter's lap, coloring quietly. Mariana was there, proud as any blood relative. Dr. Patterson was there, beaming. "I used to think strength meant not breaking," Leticia said into the microphone, her voice steady and clear. "I thought if I just built high enough walls, if I just protected myself carefully enough, I could avoid pain. But pain found me anyway. Loss found me anyway. And I learned that real strength isn't avoiding the break. It's choosing to put yourself back together. It's using your broken pieces to build something new." She told them about Marcus, about quitting nursing, about 3 years of waitressing and emotional isolation, about a little girl who'd asked her an impossible question and a man who'd seen past her walls, about choosing vulnerability over safety, about the breakdown that had forced her to actually heal instead of just survive. "A little boy taught me that being brave means being scared but doing it anyway," she said. "And a little girl taught me that family means choosing someone every single day. And my own experience taught me that the worst thing that ever happened to me could become the foundation for the best thing I ever built." She gestured to the screen behind her where the Marcus Foundation's impact statistics were displayed. Families helped, debts paid, counseling hours provided, lives changed. This foundation exists because I broke and had to put myself back together. It exists because I learned that you can hold grief and joy simultaneously, that loving people means risking loss, but the love is worth it. That purpose can come from pain if you're willing to do the work of transformation. The speech got a standing ovation. They raised $400,000 that night. But the best part came after, when a young woman approached Leticia nervously. "I'm a pediatric nurse," she said, "and I lost a patient 6 months ago and I've been thinking about quitting. But hearing your story, hearing that it's okay to break and rebuild, it makes me think maybe I can find a different way through this." Leticia took her hands. "You can. It won't look like you think it will, but you can. And if you need help, we're here." That night, driving home with her family, Leticia felt something she'd spent years chasing. Peace, not the absence of pain or fear, but the presence of purpose, the knowledge that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Sophie was chattering from the back seat about her science project. Emma was singing a nonsense song about dragons. Walter was holding Leticia's hand while he drove, and Leticia was just present, not worried about the future or dwelling on the past, just there, in that moment, with her chosen family. "Do you remember that first day in the diner?" Walter asked quietly. "When Sophie asked you to be her mom?" "Every detail," Leticia replied. "Did you have any idea it would lead to this?" "Not even remotely. I thought I was humoring a lonely kid for 15 minutes. I thought you'd never come back. Best 15 minutes of my life." "Mine too." They pulled into the driveway of the house that had become home. Sophie raced inside to feed her goldfish. Yes, it was purple, that Walter had finally gotten her. Emma toddled after her sister, trying to keep up. Walter and Letitia stood in the driveway for a moment, just looking at the warm-lit windows and the life they'd built inside. "Any regrets?" Walter asked. It had become their question, the one they asked each other regularly. A check-in, a reminder to be grateful. "Only that I almost said no," Letitia replied. "That I almost let fear win. But you didn't." "But I didn't." Before we reach the end of this story, before I tell you where they are now, I need you to really hear what we've witnessed together. We've watched a woman rebuild herself from broken pieces. We've seen a man learn to love again after loss. We've watched a child brave enough to ask a stranger for what she needed. We've witnessed a family built not on biology but on daily choice. If this story has moved you, if you see yourself in any of these characters, hit that subscribe button right now, because this is what Mr. Dawson Long Stories is about. Real people making brave choices. Messy transformations that lead somewhere beautiful. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to choose differently. That broken things can be rebuilt. That love is worth the risk. Drop a comment telling me your story. When did you choose bravery over safety? How did it change you? Your stories matter. Now let me show you where they ended up. 5 years after the wedding. 7 years after that first day in the diner. Letitia Jones Scott stood in front of Riverside Diner with her family. The diner looked exactly the same. Same cracked vinyl booths. Same rattling air conditioner. Same neon sign that flickered on the letter R. But everything else had changed. Sophie was 13 now, tall and confident and still brilliant. She'd started volunteering at the Marcus Foundation, helping with fundraising events and website design. She'd recently announced she wanted to be a hospital architect, designing spaces that helped people heal. She wore a purple jacket because some things never changed. Emma was 5, all wild curls and endless questions. She started kindergarten in the fall. She loved books and dragons and her big sister with equal intensity. She had no memory of a time when Leticia wasn't her mother, when this wasn't her family. Walter was 45, silver threading through his hair more prominently now. He'd shifted most of his business focus to philanthropy, using his wealth to fund causes that mattered. The Marcus Foundation was just one of several initiatives he supported. He'd learned that success meant nothing if it wasn't in service of something bigger. And Leticia was 46, lines around her eyes from smiling, confidence in her bearing that came from hard-won self-knowledge. The Marcus Foundation was thriving, expanding to 12 hospitals across 3 states. She'd written a book about transforming grief into purpose that had unexpectedly become a bestseller. She'd been interviewed on podcasts and news programs. She'd become an advocate for better support systems for medical families. But more than any of that, she'd become someone who knew how to be happy. Not perfectly happy, not happiness untouched by grief or fear, but the kind of deep contentment that comes from building a life aligned with your values, from choosing love every day, from transforming pain into purpose. They walked into the diner together. Mariana was behind the counter, older now but still sharp and observant. Her face lit up when she saw them. "The monthly pilgrimage," she said, grinning. "Right on schedule. Some traditions are sacred," Leticia replied. They slid into their booth. The same booth where it had all started, where a little girl had asked an impossible question and a lonely woman had said yes. Mariana brought their drinks without asking. Chocolate milk for both girls, made the right way with the vanilla secret. Coffee black for Walter. Coffee with cream for Leticia because she'd learned she actually preferred it that way, had only been drinking it black because she thought she had to be tough. Sophie pulled out her tablet and showed Mariana her latest architectural designs. Emma demanded crayons and paper to draw her own version, which would inevitably involve purple dragons. Walter and Leticia sat close, hands linked under the table, just being present. A young couple came into the diner. They looked exhausted and stressed. The woman was visibly pregnant. They slid into a booth and ordered coffee, the kind of cheap meal that suggested money was tight. Leticia watched them for a moment, recognizing something of herself 7 years ago. The careful walls, the determination to need nothing from anyone, the fear poorly disguised as independence. She stood up and walked over to their table. "Excuse me," she said gently. "I don't mean to intrude, but I run a foundation that helps families in transition. We provide things like grocery vouchers and gas cards and connections to resources. No strings attached. No questions asked. Just help if you need it. She handed them a Marcus Foundation card with a website and her direct number. The woman looked at the card, then at Leticia, tears welling up. We just found out we're having twins, she said. And I just lost my job. And we're trying to figure out how to make it work, and it's terrifying. It is terrifying, Leticia agreed. But you don't have to do it alone. Call that number. We'll help however we can. Why? The man asked, suspicious. What do you get out of it? Nothing, Leticia said, except the knowledge that someone helped me when I needed it, and now I get to pass that forward. That's all. Just people helping people. She returned to her table. Walter was smiling at her. You can't save everyone, he said gently. I know, but I can help some. That's enough. They finished their meal. Sophie and Emma split a piece of pie. Walter told a terrible dad joke that made everyone groan. Leticia looked around the table at her family, chosen and built and maintained through daily effort, and felt gratitude so profound it was almost painful. Her phone buzzed. A text from Cameron's mother. A photo of Cameron in his Little League uniform, healthy and thriving and alive. The message said, "Thinking of you today. Grateful every day for everything you did for us." Leticia showed the photo to Walter. He squeezed her hand. You did good, he said quietly. We did good, she corrected. All of us. Together. As they left the diner, Emma tugged on Leticia's hand. Mama, she said, and Leticia still felt a thrill every time she heard it. Why do we come here every month? Because this is where our family started, Leticia explained. Your sister asked me a very brave question right here in this diner, and I said yes, and that yes changed everything. What question? Can you be my mom? Sophie said, smiling. I asked her if she could be my mom, and she said yes, even though she was scared. Were you really scared? Emma asked Leticia. The most scared I'd ever been. But you did it anyway. I did it anyway. That's what being brave means. Feeling scared, but choosing love. They walked to the car. Sophie and Emma ran ahead, arguing good-naturedly about something that probably involved dragons. Walter and Leticia followed more slowly. You know what the best part is? Leticia said. What? I'm not scared anymore. Or I am, but it doesn't matter. Because I learned that being scared and being happy can exist at the same time. That love is worth every moment of fear. That family isn't about perfection. It's about showing up. We're pretty lucky, aren't we? The luckiest. They drove home through streets that had become familiar. Past the apartment building where Leticia had lived alone for 3 years. Past the hospital where she'd broken and rebuilt herself. Past all the landmarks of their journey from strangers to family. At home, Sophie helped Emma with her bath. Walter started dinner. Leticia stood in the doorway watching her family move through their evening routine. The ordinariness of it was extraordinary. The gift of boring, beautiful, everyday life. Later, after both girls were asleep, Leticia went into Emma's room to check on her one last time. Emma was sprawled across her bed, covers kicked off, completely peaceful. Leticia covered her gently, kissed her forehead. Then, she went to Sophie's room. Sophie was reading with a flashlight under the covers, a rule violation Leticia chose to ignore tonight. You're supposed to be asleep, Leticia said softly. I know. I just wanted to finish this chapter. Sophie looked up, her face illuminated by the flashlight. Leticia? Yeah? I'm glad I asked you that day. In the diner. I'm glad you said yes. Me too, sweetheart. Best yes I ever said, even though it was scary, especially because it was scary. The scary things are usually the ones worth doing. I'll remember that. Leticia kissed her forehead too. Good night, my brave girl. Good night, Mom. She found Walter on the back porch, looking at stars. She settled beside him, fitting into the curve of his arm like she'd always belonged there. You know what Marcus told me? She said quietly. The last thing he said before he died? What? Being brave just means you're scared, but you do it anyway. Smart kid. The smartest. Leticia paused. I think he'd be happy about the foundation, about what came from his story. I think he would too. They sat in comfortable silence. Two people who'd been broken and had rebuilt themselves and each other. Two people who'd chosen love over safety. Two people who'd learned that family wasn't about biology or perfection. It was about showing up every day and choosing each other again. Inside the house, their daughters slept peacefully. The Marcus Foundation would help another family tomorrow. Life would continue with all its joy and grief, and ordinary, extraordinary moments. And Leticia finally understood what she'd spent years trying to learn. That strength wasn't about never breaking. It was about breaking and choosing to rebuild. That love wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about deciding the pain was worth it. That family wasn't something you were born into. It was something you built, day by day, choice by choice, yes by yes. A little girl had asked her an impossible question 7 years ago. Can you be my mom? And Leticia had said yes, not knowing it was the beginning of everything. Not knowing it would require her to be braver than she'd ever imagined. Not knowing it would transform her from someone who survived into someone who thrived. But she'd said yes, despite the fear, despite the walls, despite every logical reason to protect herself. And that yes had made all the difference. They say broken things can't be fixed. They're wrong. Broken things can be rebuilt into something stronger than they were before. You just have to be brave enough to hand someone your pieces and trust them not to drop them. A little girl handed me hers in a shabby diner over chocolate milk and pancakes. I handed her mine back. And together, with a man brave enough to love again after loss, we built something unbreakable. That's not a fairy tale. That's just what happens when people choose each other despite their fear. When they decide that love is worth the risk. When they say yes to impossible questions. That's family. If this story touched something in you, if you recognize yourself in Leticia's journey or Walter's grief or Sophie's bravery, I need you to do something. Hit that like button to tell me this story mattered. Subscribe to Mr. Dawson Long Stories because we believe in narratives that reflect real life. The messy, complicated, beautiful truth of being human. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late. That broken things can be rebuilt. That choosing vulnerability over safety is the bravest thing we can do. Drop a comment and tell me your story. When did you say yes to something that terrified you? How did it change your life? What impossible question are you still afraid to answer? Your stories matter. Your bravery matters. Your willingness to keep choosing love even after you've been hurt matters. Remember, strength isn't about building walls high enough that nothing can hurt you. It's about being brave enough to let those walls down. It's about saying yes when everything in you screams to say no. It's about choosing connection over safety. It's about finding your people and building your family and showing up every single day even when it's hard. It's about being scared and brave at the exact same time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for witnessing this story. Thank you for believing that transformation is possible. Now go out there and ask your impossible question. Say your terrifying yes. Choose your people. Build your family. Be brave. This is Mr. Dawson Long Stories, reminding you that the best stories aren't about perfect people. They're about real people choosing to be better. People like you. People like Leticia. People who understand that broken things can become beautiful. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next story.